Good. All right. No.
We're using the mic now.
Yeah. I,
Oh, I think we're good. Can you guys hear me? Sweet. I get the pleasure of introducing two of my closest friends, Nate and Dimitri. It's cool getting to do church with them out in Columbia. When I look at their topic, it's something that, when it comes to both of these guys, it's been something really close to me. And just being in a relationship with them and being able to be open and vulnerable with them, and now I'm getting the opportunity to lead some guys next to them is just a really cool thing, and I'm excited to do that. But I'm going to pray to get us started, and then we will jump in. God, thank you so much for these two guys right here. I don't know where I would be without them, and I'm grateful for the relationships I have with them. They've definitely pushed me to be a godly man, and I pray that every day that I continue to grow closer to you and build that solid foundation on your word, God. I pray that through this lesson that we all open up our hearts and I pray that you are speaking through Nate and Dimitri, and the words that are coming out of their mouth are the words that we all need to hear, and they can push us closer to you, God. Just speak through them, and may we all just be humble, and I thank you for it all, and it's in your son's name I pray. Amen.
man.
All right, so we can go ahead and jump in to the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And as you guys can see, it's gone now, but we're going to be talking about intimacy and vulnerability and how those two ideas are essential when it comes to every relationship that we will ever have in our daily lives. And so to start us off, we're going to start off in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 through 12. That's Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. It says that two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either one of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And so I wanted to unpack that verse a little bit, and, as I was, sitting through RJ's lesson, and my friends were like, so are you nervous? Are you nervous? I'm like, oh, I'm not really that nervous, and then RJ got to his third point. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty nervous. And so it makes me think of, like, back in high school when I had basketball games, and I get, like, the butterflies in my stomach of, like, oh, I'm nervous. I'm confident that I can do it, but I am a little nervous of what's to come. And it's funny how that verse starts out. It says that two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. And it makes me think, man, I'm glad I'm not up here by myself. I got Dimitri here to pick up the slack if I don't do a great job. But diving into that verse, that first sentence is two are better than one. Why? Because they have a good return for their labor. If you change the sentence up a little bit, it really is communicating, man, when you go at it by yourself, you're not going to have as good of a return for your labor. You're going to work real hard, but you're not going to get to the point where you could if you would have just involved somebody else and have them help you out. And then it goes a little deeper into the next verse. Is if either one of them falls down, one can help the other up. And so, right off the bat, you jump into a relationship dynamic. And one thing that I've come to learn, and what we all know of our God, is that He's a relational God, right? And He created us to have relationship with each other. And so often in this topic that we're talking about, in vulnerability and intimacy, that's something that we like to push away. That's something that we don't want to have involved in. We don't want to get real. We don't want to have people see the real us, because in that moment, they could reject us for who we really are. And so what this is communicating is not just, I'm up here, Dimitri's up here, so therefore, since we have two people, we gonna be all right. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about, man, when I'm going through stuff and I want to figure it out all on my own, I got Dimitri right here. And, a lot of people, are going through a lot of stuff right now. And so that's where some of this emotion comes from, not necessarily because I'm going through a lot, but I know that I've gone through a lot of things. And so often, I've said, man, I'll just figure it out all by myself. And it leads to just not good things. The next verse is John chapter 15, verse 12 through 13. It says, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And so this is a command that we've all heard, right? We all know it's like, yeah, I should love like Jesus. I'm trying to be like Jesus. We're all disciples, right? But if I were to ask you guys, this verse, this type of love that is being described, if it were to be summed up in one word, what would you describe it as? The love that Jesus had for us, what would that word be? Sacrifice, right? Sacrificial type of love. And when it comes to our relationships, that's the love that we have to have if we're going to have the depth of relationships that's going to go out into the world and make a difference for the kingdom. And so you look at this type of stuff, and it's not easy. And so a lot of the time when it comes to that type of love, we like to subtract. I'm not a big math guy, but Drew, the guy who introduced us, is. So shout out to Drew. But you have an equation, 2 + 2 = 4, right? And so often we want to get to the equals 4, the equals love like Jesus, and we subtract vulnerability out of the equation and then wonder why we're not getting to the desired answer. So I wanted to give the definition of what vulnerability was. It's the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And raise your hand if, man, that sounds like a great thing that you want to partake in. Putting yourself in a position that is going to risk you possibly getting hurt either physically or emotionally. Raise your hand if you've been in a spot where you've opened your heart to somebody and that has happened, where you've been hurt physically or emotionally. Most people in this room. And why do you think that is? It's because we're imperfect human beings. But it still doesn't take away the call that we are to love sacrificially. To love sacrificially means it's not comfortable. It's not something that we necessarily want to do. Jesus was not like, man, this is just such a good time sitting up here getting tortured and beat and then at the end of the day killed. I imagine he wasn't super thrilled about that. And so when it comes to how we're sacrificing for our friends, part of that is being open and vulnerable about what we got going on so that they can come in and help us up when we fall. I've also got a quote from C.S. Lewis. It says, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it up carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable." And so, you see, being open, being vulnerable, being real, with each other is not easy. It's not comfortable, and it never was said to be. And I don't know if this is news to anyone else, being a disciple is not easy, it's not comfortable, and it's not just a walk in the park all the time. It was never promised to be that, but our intimacy and vulnerability is directly tied to the way that we love and the depth of our relationships with each other and with God. And so, moving into our points, we're going to have 4 points. It's going to spell the word grow, a little cute little whatever that's called. So it's going to spell grow, but if I want to build authentic and deep relationships, I must.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I just wanted to check before I started rattling off. But like Nate said, if I want to build authentic and deep relationships, I must, 1, get real with my leaders. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 11 through 13. This is Paul pouring out his heart to his friends and people that he has poured into. He's helped lead to the Lord at the church in Corinth. Him and other leaders, he's speaking about for him. Listen to what he says to the disciples there. "My friends at Corinth, our hearts are open wide to you, and we speak freely, holding nothing back from you. If there is a block in our relationship, it is not with us, for we carry you in our hearts with great love. Yet you still withhold your affections from us. So I speak to you as our children. Make room in your hearts for us as we have done for you. So, guys, here and many other places, I think we can look through as you study God's word, and you can see that the scriptures are clear. And one of the things that it is plain and clear about is that if we're going to be able to draw close to God, we're going to be able to be used by him, to be a blessing, to be blessed by him, it must involve godly leaders. It must involve them, right? But like Nate was saying, being vulnerable with anybody, letting anybody in can be hard, including maybe those that are stepping into leadership into our lives. But I want to go right off the bat challenge us with this to understanding that opening up and being vulnerable to our leaders means more than simply, I think, a lot of times what a lot of us chalk it up to, right? Where we go, well, yeah, I recognize that maybe that person has a title or they have a position of leadership in my small group or in some ministry in my church or something like that, right? Or, yeah, I know that I go to church with that leader. We pass each other. We say what's up or something like that. It means more than that, far more than that, y'all. And I think it includes, but is not limited to, that we pursue those leaders. Again, that we're pursuing closeness and intimate relationship with them, that we stay open with them, and that we listen to them. Many times as I reflect over my own walk, and also as I see time and time again throughout the walks of other people, I say, and we all will say, man, I want to bust down the gates of hell, right? And I want to be able to save lives, and I want to be on fire for God, and I want to change. I want my life to be changed, and I want to change other lives to the glory of God, which is great. But again, I think we say that thinking somehow that we can separate being able to do that and God equipping us for that from using one of the greatest tools that God has always and does now even in our walks choose to use to help get us to that point. And again, that's leaders. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17 reads, "Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that will be of no benefit to you." And so again, it tells us straight up here in Hebrews 13, 17, in that first sentence, submit to your leaders, right? And I don't know about you all, but even now, years into my walk as a disciple and following God, there's something about when I read that verse and I get to that word, submit. It does something. If I'm honest, and I don't know about you guys, it does something, right? And I have to deal with that. But I think a big part of that, again, deals with a lot of what Nate and I are talking about and sharing with you guys as well this morning is I think part of where that I take issue with that, and maybe many of you do, is part of vulnerability includes being willing to submit ourselves to someone or to something else, right? Being willing to subordinate our will and choose to be guided or led by another. And again, I don't know about you all, but oftentimes that can be scary business, right? That can feel very scary and can feel very, very risky. And I think a lot of times a question on our minds, right? And not just on our minds, I see this actually play out a lot of times, right? In conversations out loud. But you'll have a conversation happening between a disciple and their leader, right? And basically, the one being discipled is heated, and you may hear something like, "Why should I listen to you?" And so whether it comes out like that aggressively, or we keep it in our minds and it passive-aggressively shows up in the way that we treat and interact with our leaders, I think it is something that more often than not, if we're honest, a lot of us deal with in one way or another, right? But another thing I want to point out to you all, okay, is what comes before submitting to the leaders, because I think it plays a big part in helping us see why God says it's a benefit to submit to them. Because again, without submitting to those leaders, as scary as that can be, we will never, guys, none of us, me, you, none of us in this room or anyone else, will get to become or be where God desires for us to be. And not only will we never be transformed, we will never be effective in truly transforming other people, right? And so again, I think part of getting there starts with, in Hebrews 13:17, heeding to what it says there of having confidence in your leaders, right? And so again, y'all may be thinking, like I just said with the hypothetical example of that person, you're like, well, why should I have confidence in somebody? Are you, Nate, Dimitri, are you just asking me to blindly trust somebody? Because, yeah, I'm not down for that. I don't do that sort of thing. And I just want you to know that is not what we or the scriptures are advocating, right? We're not saying to blindly trust someone. We're also not saying that somehow that leaders, because maybe they are in a place of leadership, that somehow they're immune to you needing to check behind them, right? And make sure that what they're saying is truly the message of God and that it is based on truth, right? We most certainly need to do that, and we want to encourage you all to be doing that. But I think when we do that, I want to make sure that I challenge and I caution you all and myself and him that when we choose to do that with our leaders, right, that we don't do it based off of hearsay or assumptions or any of the other noises, the voices, right, that Anthony was alluding to last night, that all of us have trying to shout at us. Not listening to those voices, but listening to the voice of truth and allowing that to be what we use to check them, to check ourselves, to check anyone and anything that we involve in our lives. But again, have confidence in your leaders, right? Why? Well, if you just look back, I'm not going to have us read this, all right? Jot it down and do it on your own time. But if you actually just back up about 10 verses in this same chapter, I think it gives us and points us in the right direction. And there it says something along the lines of, remember your leaders, right? Who did what? Who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. And so what it's saying, basically, long story short, guys, in my words, is the evidence is there. If we would just sometimes, guys, sit back, maybe just kind of shut our mouths and look and listen and reflect, kind of like RJ was saying, on what are some ways that God has brought his people into your life, those leaders specifically, and they have stooped down and they have served you. They have sacrificed. They spent time. They spent money. They've bent over backwards. And not only for you, but I think if we're paying attention, we'll see they're not just doing it for us and doing the best they can with that. We'll see them doing that throughout their lives with other people. Time and time and time again, and there's story after story after story, and evidence upon evidence, right? And so really God is saying, look there. Don't blindly trust, but when you look there, the proof is going to be in the pudding, and you're going to see that this is my man, this is my woman that I've sent into your life to help you be a better man or woman of God. But also, I want to point out real quick, if you didn't notice, there are a few other things in Hebrews 13:17 that it gives us of why godly leaders can be trusted and why it's a benefit to us. All right, and I'll have you all write these down if you want to, and you look back on your own time. But a few that it gives us there is it also says that we can trust and be open with our godly leaders because they live accountable to God. So again, they're not just out there willy-nilly doing their own thing or just bossing people around based upon their opinion and because they're on a power trip. They understand why they're where they are in the position of serving and leader that they are, and they know who they answer to ultimately. And so it should be reflected, and you should be easy to see that they're not perfect, but they're doing the very best they can, guys, every waking moment with the words that come out of their mouth and the actions that they carry out, that it's going to glorify God and it's going to bring a smile to his face, right? But also, not only do they live accountable to God, we should see that they genuinely care and they long to help. I don't know if y'all noticed there in that verse when it said that they keep watch over your souls. And I think sometimes maybe when we think of somebody watching over us, we like get spooked out by that, right? And it's like this icky feeling. And we're like, why you got to be like looking over my shoulder and stuff like that? I don't like that. Like, give me my space sort of thing. And so I hope we know it's not like a person like watching over us negatively, watching and looking for our downfall, right? Or they're stalking us in some sort of way. But really that this is almost like where my mind went is when I look at a lot of in the families in our churches and I see how with babies or with toddlers or little kids, I see the way that the mothers and the fathers of those kids, right, or their older family members, the way they tend to them or while they're watching them while they're sleeping And sometimes that even means them losing sleep themselves and them putting their well-being behind the well-being of those that they're looking after. And I don't know if you noticed that, maybe you're like, well, how does the kid analogy relate to us? Or maybe some of us don't even like that. But if you look back even at the first verse that I read, right, in 2 Corinthians 6, when you talk about the relationships that God wants us to be able to have within the church, they are family-like relationships. And so the words that Paul uses to describe the people he's talking to are not, hey, you're my enemies, right? Or you're people that I just see as, I get to boss you around. He says, my friends at Corinth, right? And then towards the end, he says, I speak to you as like my children, right? And so again, these are people that are not out to get you, but they're wanting to do the best they can to strive to help you to be able to not only find salvation and grow in that here on this side of earth, but to make sure that you make it to eternity, right? And so one last thing I want to say on that is, raise your hand if you are like a parent in this room. Yeah. And so, and not just y'all, even if you're not, maybe you have someone that's younger or someone in your life, a sibling, a parent, whoever, but a loved one that you deeply care about. And could you ever imagine yourself getting into a point where you say, man, if I see them heading down a road that's literally going to run their life off a cliff, no sweat off my brow, I don't care. That would never happen, right? It would never happen. Even if you can't necessarily, you can't necessarily force and control things, but at the same time, whether they're in your presence under your household or they're somewhere off in the distance, they're on your mind and your heart constantly, right? And you're praying for them, and you want everything to happen towards being able to help them to be rescued, to be saved, to turn their lives around. And so again, that's the type of leaders that we're talking about. Those are the type of people that God are putting into our lives. But also, lastly, like I said, and mainly also in that verse 7, maybe models this even more, is not only that they live accountable to God and that they generally carry along to help, but they model vulnerability themselves. And from that, I just want to make a note before I go further to say, so on the other end of though, to help this and not to further hinder this any more than it already is, leaders in this room or future leaders, anyone aspiring to be a leader, I hope you take note of this and you listen carefully, and I listen carefully, that you cannot expect, you should not, in fact, expect those that you're trying to pour into and lead and invest in to trust you, or really anyone, if you're not modeling these things or at least striving to model them. They shouldn't trust you, and they shouldn't trust me. But, again, be as it may, we're moving forward to say these are people that God is showing us in our lives. If we really want the help, they can help us. I want to use one other analogy, say a couple other things, and then I'm going to move on to our second point. How many people in here love like playing games, like board games, card games, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, me too. I love them anytime. Real quick in particular, I don't know if y'all have heard of like Monopoly Deal, but Kyle, Corrine, and I in our youth ministry, we love whooping up on the teens. It's a Monopoly Deal anytime. Now, sometimes they hand us some L's as well, but it's so much fun, right? But another game, like a throwback one, and maybe it's still making a comeback, is Battleship. I love Battleship, right? But in the case of where I'm going to use it here, I don't like it so much. And what I mean by that is this, is when it comes to our relationships with our leaders a lot of times, kind of like what Paul seems like he's dealing with those that he's trying to lead, right? He's all in, he's trying to be fully vulnerable and wide open with them. It's not being met and reciprocated the other way around, right? And he can't get in. And I think, honestly, we like to say that our relationships with our leaders are good, but I think more often than not, they're like those as well. And they're like we're playing Battleship when we're having conversations with our leaders a lot of times, right? Like they're set up across the table, on the other side of us, and we're at odds, we're at battle or at war with them. And so they're trying to identify maybe like strongholds or things that we're struggling with, or where the devil is trying to get a foothold in our lives and to help us. And they're asking those questions. It's almost like we hear G5, and we go, nope, try again, right? Okay, A1, you tell me. Maybe. No, just kidding. Well, that's maybe closer. You're in the ballpark, but still not it. right? And then if you think about battleship, if you played, you have where there's even if you have the ship that's there that you're trying to identify, is it a little one? Is it a big one? Like, what are we dealing with here? And I think so often we're like trying to hide these things and keep it away from some of the very people that God says are our biggest supporters and cheerleaders and rescue team to help us through these things. And so, guys, I want to challenge you. If that's you, that you find yourself doing that a lot of times with your leaders, stop it, quit it, because it's not going to end well for you. And really, like this verse at 17 says towards the end, it's no benefit not only you, but it's not going to be a benefit to anyone, including that leader. Now, when we do choose to lean into our relationship with our leaders vulnerably, here are a couple of things I'll just have you can jot down that they can help us do, okay? And there are plenty of scriptures you can look at, see maybe your leaders or someone else to help you if you want to find those. But one, those godly leaders can help us to overcome sin and struggles. Two, they can help us to avoid unnecessary mistakes and pain. And I'll stop there really quickly. I'll try to be short, but I think so often about like church planting has been crazy hard, y'all. Like you wouldn't believe. And I'm beyond grateful, like Nate said, that I have him by my side to be able to do that with, and his wife Mackenzie, and our core there at Columbia, and really our whole Crossway family there. But also that there are those that have come before us here at St. Charles and the other older church plants that we can continue to look back to, and they're not pushing us off and going, "Good luck, kids," right? But leading into it, that they took time, sacrifice to train and prepare us. But even after, since we've been out there, that like for specifically some relationships for me that I look at in youth ministry, and guys, I've made like tons of mistakes and stuff like that. Some of them have been unnecessary. And I'm able to look back and reflect and go, man, some of that could have been avoided if I would have sought advice and looked back many times. And so actually, I share with you, last family vacation, I believe it was, I had made one of the commitments that I made to God and to myself and to those leaders is that this is what I want to work on this year. And I hope they've been able to see that. But literally, anybody that knows me knows I can talk. You probably can see that now. And so, man, when I had questions, I'm like, Ashley, RJ, I got to talk to you. Evan, Jenner, I got, Aaron, Jess, let's sit and talk, right? And there's like even this inside joke between like me and Ashley and RJ now where I'll go, hey, I got some questions. And they'll go, all right, 3's your limit, just kidding, and they're like, that you can ask me whatever you need to ask me. And I'm so appreciative of that because, again, without that wise counsel, so much destruction could be taking place. But also, leaders can help us grow up in our salvation. They can help us, fourthly, to be equipped to serve and to equip others. And so, once again, I want to say this real quick, all right, specifically. But anybody in here, if you, again, not only want your life to be great, but maybe you have family, you have friends, or you have, as you look around and you say, I want to be like the next Carrie or Hannah. I want to be like the next TC and Maria or whoever it is. I want to be able to have God grow me in my salvation and raise me up where I can share, like RJ was saying, and pass it on. But I want to make this clear, like the scriptures are making clear to you guys here, right, with that fourth point. A crucial part of helping you to become a leader and to lead well is allowing yourself to be led well. If you can't follow well, you will not lead well. And a crucial part of being able to to follow well so that you can lead well is choosing to be open and vulnerable with your leaders, guys. I want to read you one more verse, and then I'm pass it on to point 2. Ephesians chapter 4, 11 through 13 helps us see this. It says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers. Why? To equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. And so again, guys, hopefully that gets you started, if nothing else, to see and me to see that like God's word says, and like our leaders and others are trying to tell us around us, it is a true benefit in many ways, more ways than one, for us to be vulnerable and open in our relationships with our leaders.
And number 2, if I want to build authentic and deep relationships, I must rely on my friends. I want you to write this verse down again, Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. By the end of this lesson, you should have this verse memorized. But I think there's so much in it that is so good. But it says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And so, the group of people, so when I say we must rely on our friends, I want to make a distinction to our friends being other disciples. This is who I'm talking about right now. We'll get to the lost in Dimitri's next point. But when it comes to our friends, when it comes to other disciples that we're interacting with, we all know that our relationships with each other have to look different than they do with those in the world. It doesn't mean that you don't love those in the world and you love the people that you go to church with, but you have a level of intimacy that you have with other disciples that you wouldn't have with the lost. Meaning that I'm able to come to one of my guys, I'm able to come to Dimitri and be like, man, I'm going through this sin right now. What should I do? I'm not going to go to the guy at the gas station that's pumping my gas or I pay to pump the gas, but I'm not going to go to him and be like, hey, man, I'm dealing with some sexual sin. How do I figure this out? No one's going to do that. Why? Because you're not going to get the advice that's rooted in Scripture, and you don't have a real relationship with that person. And so, by show of hands, who's seen this is an old commercial, but who's seen the commercial that I've fallen and I can't get up commercial? So everybody knows what that commercial is. So you got this old dude, right? He falls over. He can't get up on his own. He falls over, and they made this device that you press the button, and that is able to allow him to call someone and be like, I need help. I need you to help me up because I can't do it on my own. And in this verse, it says that if either of them falls down, because say me and Dimitri are together. We are together right now. If either one of us falls down, say he falls down, I'm right here with him. I can help him up right here. But if Dimitri doesn't involve me in anything, and I'm not really talking about me and him walking down the street and he trips and falls and I can help him up. Dimitri can get up on his own. He's like the fastest and most athletic dude I know. But it's talking about more of like a falling short, like a spiritually I've fallen on my face and I don't know what to do, right? And you see, if Dimitri decides to if he's going through some deep dark sin, and I'm checking in on him and all the things, and he's telling me, no, everything's good. Meanwhile, he's sitting in the floor. He got out of the shower and fell like the old dude did, but he's not hitting the button of I need help. That's often where we find ourselves. We're laying there. We think we got it all together, when in reality, we're some old dude, helpless, sitting on the floor. And so, and that it goes on to say, it says, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up, meaning you're just going to sit there on the floor and not be able to move forward. You're not going to be able to grow. You're not going to be able to do the things you want to do and impact the lives of the people you want to impact because you've sat in this spot of selfishness of I'm not going to show my heart to anyone. I don't want to talk about my weaknesses. I don't want to talk about the hurts that I have. I don't want to tell Dimitri that the way he said that to me hurt my feelings because that's uncomfortable. And then we wonder why our friendships with other disciples we have 50 different friendships, and they're all about this deep. And we wonder, and then that goes into what Dimitri's talking about. I'm not going to steal his thunder, but we wonder when we have that, and we have cross chat, we have church, and we have all these things, and these people that are coming in to see new, real, godly relationships, all they see is the same relationships they saw with the gas station guy. And so that's why, and so when it comes to relying on our friends, it means that there's an aspect of, man, I got your back, you got mine. And, with that idea, oftentimes I like to convince myself when I'm being prideful and I don't want to talk about what I got going on, I can convince myself I've fallen down, right? I'm in a mess. And I convince myself, oh, it's not on me. It's because no one else is coming to me and asking me what I got going on. But where do we get that from? We're called to go and seek out our leaders. We're called to go and seek out our friends and allow them to be a part of our lives. If Dimitri, all he tells me is everything's good, everything's good, everything's good, then how am I supposed to know that he needs help picked up? Because I'm not living with this dude. So what if he's at home doing stuff he don't need to be doing? I'm not every second of the day texting Meech, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing? But there's a level of accountability within yourself to say, man, I can't do this alone, and I need someone else. I need other people to hold me accountable. I need other people to hold my feet to the fire and get me and help me to overcome things, right? So often we hear about, like, God helping us overcome certain sins, and we chalk it up to, man, like it just clicked in my brain one day. Part of the way that God helps us overcome some of these things is through the people that he's put in our lives, through the leaders, but also through the godly friendships that you have that are able to look you in the eye and tell you you're being an idiot. And oftentimes that's not easy to hear, but it's absolutely needed if we want to have real godly relationships with other disciples. Yeah. In 1 John chapter 3, verse 16 through 18, it says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." And so, like I said, this is very similar to the verse I brought up earlier, and if it were all summed up in one word, it would be what? Say it again. Sacrifice. Say it a little louder. So sacrifice. And if I asked everyone in here, I'm not going to do this, but I want you all to think about this. If I asked all of you, man, I want you to think of one person that you would say, man, I'd lay down my life for that person. I bet most of you in your mind would be like, yeah, I would think that person. You got at least one. I'm not saying that your thought is absolutely true. I think that's what I'm here to challenge, to get us to really understand that, and to be honest, most of us are not getting put in a position. I've never had to been put in a position to die for him. None of us had. Most of us, I'm not going to say no, I don't know everybody in the room, but most of us are not getting put in a position where somebody got a gun pointed at Dimitri's head. I'm like, no. Like, that's not what we're getting put in a position of. But then it directly goes down and says, and it explains it a little deeper. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? So part of love is sacrificing, laying down your conveniences, laying down the things that you want to do, laying down your comfortability in order for that someone else that's in need to get what they need. And it sounds a lot like Jesus, right? And that's the person we're called to be like, but it absolutely involves vulnerability. And when we choose to not be vulnerable, we're saying, man, I don't feel like it's important. You don't need to know me. I don't need to know you. I'm okay with our relationships being this deep. And then in verse 18, it says, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And this is something that, I've thought a lot about. But, a lot of us, I'm from Alabama and moved here in 2018. And I got here in 2018, and then I had met somebody for the first time, and they're like, man, I love you. I'm like, okay, that's weird. I don't know who you are. And I think that's innocent in a way, and it's good. We're called to love everyone. But so often back in Alabama, sometimes people would say, I love you, but then I'm like, man, you're not really invested in my life on a real, in-depth way. So you're saying you love me, but it doesn't show up in your actions. And so what I want to warn against is when you're thinking about, man, I'd be willing to die for that person. I'd be willing to do whatever it took if it meant for them to have a right relationship with God. Are you willing to not just say all the right things, but show up when it's time to show up, when it sucks to show up, when you're drained and all these things, but you got to show up anyway because they are in need? Is that the type of relationships that you have, and are you relying on? And if you do, those are relationships that you can rely on. If you don't have that, get that. And so the other thing is, part of that, and I'm going to brag on one of my guys. There's a situation where there's a guy that had left our church a couple of times, and this is like the second time he had left. And he was, in limbo of coming back. He was like sitting down with me. We sat down at Slim Chickens 4 or 5 times for about 4 hours talking about what's going on. And he's struggling. He's like, but I want to come to CMU. But in January, I booked a flight to Charlotte because I want to see my favorite pro soccer team. And I was like, okay, just don't go. And he was like, well, I paid $350 for the plane ticket, and it's non-refundable. And I was like, oh, well, let me see what I can do about that. And before I could figure out what to do about that, the next conversation I had with this guy, he's like, oh, I'm coming to CMU now. I was like, how you just find $350? He's like, no, Mitchell paid for it for me. I was like, what? I was like, the guy that's been baptized for 4 months? He just paid for it for you? And I'm going to ask him, did you ever ask him to? Did you ever ask him to pay you back? He said no, if you guys didn't see him. Mitchell is a guy that I had the opportunity to study the Bible with, and he challenges me in this type of stuff every single day. And when it comes to friendships like that, where you see a need and you meet it, no matter what, like I don't know who in here, if I was like, I need $350, most of you probably would not just hand it to me, and then be like, well, you don't have to pay me back. And in fact, Jackson asked him, hey, I'll pay you back. He said, don't you dare. You're not paying me back. And Jackson brought him the money and he gave it back to him. And so there's things like that where you see real relationships and how important they are, and it comes with vulnerability and it comes with loving Christ the way that Christ loved us. And so, and that's the thing, being open, this is my next point, is being open is an incredible and huge part of discipleship. And this is kind of goes in what Dimitri ended on, is as other disciples that are hoping to reach the lost, if you are not exemplifying how to be vulnerable to your other friends that are disciples, especially if you're in a leadership position, and even if you're not, you're sitting in a guys group or a girl discipleship time, and you're not being the example and showing how to be vulnerable, when you do that, it's contagious. It's contagious. Mm-hmm. My guys group struggles a little bit with vulnerability, and they don't like to, open up as fast. And I just had to be like, all right, guys, what's going on? But as soon as one person does it, then the floodgates come open, and all these manly men are crying, and they wouldn't want me to be dogging them like this, but that's what happens. And it's contagious. But when you show your heart, when you show that, and I'm looking at Dimitri, and I'm like, man, this is what I'm going through, and I need your help. What that does, it not only helps me, he can help me up, but it strengthens Dimitri. It strengthened me when Dimitri did it for me. If Dimitri is someone I look up to, I've known him since I was 7 years old. Yeah. 7 years old. If Dimitri never was able to look at me and be like, man, I'm going through it. Man, I've got my flaws. I've got things that I need help with. I would never feel as connected to him as I do now. And it would never have shown me, man, if I'm going to be like Dimitri, which is oftentimes what you guys have heard me say is I want to be like Dimitri. If I wanted to be like Dimitri, that means I have to be able to show my heart. That means I have to, in spite of, that quote I mentioned at the beginning, is in spite of if I do just hide my heart away, I can avoid it being broken. I can avoid all the pain and all the suffering and all that stuff. But what I will avoid is an impact in the kingdom and deep godly friendships that I absolutely need, because if I don't have them, I'm going to be the old guy sitting on the bathroom floor, not able to get up. And so when it comes to our friendships, and I'm super, I'm surprised I got through that whole point without crying a little bit more. But when it comes to friendships, guys, they're so integral in our relationship with God. Like, our leaders are important, but there's something about, and our leaders are very important. Let me not gloss over that. But there's something about when someone that's not your leader, someone that's walking in life with you, can look you in the face and be like, I'm going through this stuff, and also be able to look you in the face and be like, you're being stupid
Mhm.
and talk you off the cliff that you're ready to jump off of. There's something about that strengthens not only you but the other person that you're with, and we have to be able to understand that. We have to be able to rely on our friends and have friendships that are willing to just be like, oh, you need $300? Here you go. Oh, you needed me to pick you up at 6 a.m. every morning for work? Here you go. Oh, you need to borrow my car even though you're a terrible driver? Here you go. Funny story, TC does that a lot, and he gets his car wrecked a lot of the time, but he still does it, right? But are we in a position to where, like, man, even if my car gets wrecked, I'm going to let him have it. Even if I lose some sleep, even if I don't get any sleep, I'm still going to pick them up at 5 a.m. in the morning to take them to work because they don't have a way to work. Even if they don't, there's a guy in our ministry that his parents don't let him use the washer and dryer because he didn't pay for the washer and dryer, and they don't let him eat any of the food in the house, and he has basically little to no money. And so part of what our guys group does is he comes and washes his clothes at my house, and people are buying him food every day, and that is not a fun thing. Me and Cameron have found the cheapest options in all of Columbia, so that way I'm not breaking the bank. But meeting a need and showing people that you love them, not in just your words, but showing them in your actions. And then moving on to point 3.
All right, so point 3, if I want to be able to have deep and authentic relationships, I must, 3, and we've kind of been knocking on the door of this already, but open my heart, not just to leaders and to rely on my friends, but open my heart to the lost. And I'm sure it's no mystery to y'all any more than it is to me that it doesn't take long to look out in our world and see one of the ongoing tragedies, unfortunately, is that we see time after time after time, year after year, that church after church is dwindling, dying out, and closing their doors, right? No new people coming in, no new disciples being made. Everybody kind of gets older, and then eventually there's no one to pass the mantle on to, right? And what happens? It's gone, off the map, right? Or you have, in the other case, there's some that they may be sitting there and they're still alive, but they're kind of off in like the mountain somewhere. No one really kind of knows like that they're there, because in a sense they've almost isolated themselves, right, into their little oasis. Man, we've got our sliver of salvation. I got saved, right? We're good, and me and my friends. And so kid and teen and campus ministries began turning into nothing more than babysitting services, right? Or campus ministries with, some of you older young adults and stuff like that. It turns into like these holified fraternities and sororities, right? Where, I just click up with my Christian friends, right? And we all just hang out together and we do our own little thing over here because we don't want to be around like those people. We don't want to get dragged down or infected by them, sort of thing. Right? And so in either case or many other cases, guys, when we see things like this happen within our churches and with our fellowship, we turn inward. And so we no longer are focusing on the world and advancing the kingdom. We're no longer focusing on Jesus, and it becomes about us. It's selfish. We don't call it that, but that's what it is. This is a form of selfishness, guys. We sing a lot of songs that I love. One of the ones that came to mind when I thought of this, and I think, again, just as a challenge even to myself, maybe to challenge you, but one of them we sing a lot throughout our plants is this one called All About You, right? I'm not going to sing it, not one of my better suits, okay? So I'm not going to punish y'all that way. But kind of like talking through it, and maybe some of it will sound familiar to some of you. But, there's a piece where it says, because we're all about you and the world you promised, and all we have will give you praise, right? We're all about you, and the world won't stop us living your way always, right? And so it's easy for us to sing that song or any of the songs that we've been singing so far this weekend and through the rest of it. And even when we go back home to our respective churches and things like that, right? We can sing those songs all day and know the words backwards and forwards. But do we mean those words? And do those words reflect really my heart before God and the choices that I'm making, the radical commitment that I'm willing to live and to die for? And is the world being impacted because of that? I want to read you guys another passage. I have fallen in love with the Word of God, y'all, more and more the older I get, and seeing the importance of it. And it's so cool, even with so many like stories that I've heard, for many years now, time and time again, being able to look at it and go, man, that blows my mind. That's like one of those things you hear about and you're like, I wish I could have been there to see it go down. And so one of them is I'm sure you guys are familiar with, where Jesus, one of the miracles he performs is he meets this guy that is demon possessed, right? In fact, he has so many demons in him that the demons like are in control of him in his life, and they answer for him when Jesus asks him the name, and they say, we are legion, for we are many, right? And so I want to read the end of that story, though, because Jesus meets him, he where he's at, he transforms him, and then this is where the story ends in Mark 5:18 through 20. It says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. So a couple people been getting, some shout-outs. Anthony Walker, I've heard, has gotten quite a few shout-outs already. I'm about to give him another one. But if any of you heard him speak, even beyond here at this retreat, one of the things I've heard Anthony and some others say is every disciple has a was testimony, right? My life and who I was before Christ, and the utter mess that I was, utter blindness and lostness that I found that I was in, needing someone to come in and to rescue me from that, allowing God to use them to do that, right? And we see this happen with this Legion guy, right? It's plain as day. But what I love also is that it didn't stop there. He had who he was and now who he had become. And because of that, God had given him a testimony, a story that he could tell to go out and tell people, right? Not how good he was, but how good the God that he served and was changed by is. And part of that required him to do what, guys? I don't know about y'all. It doesn't say it specifically in there, but could you imagine him going throughout these 10 cities and going everywhere he could and telling all these people what the Lord had done for him and how he had mercy on him, and it not including him showing the scars of when it says where he lived before Jesus came and brought him out, and he was living among the tombs and cutting himself and hurting himself, hurting other people, and they couldn't bind him, right? The demons that had controlled him and bombarded his life. All of that is ugly and it's messy, right? And it probably is not things he's most proud of. And yet, some of the messiest parts of his life, guys, I'm sure he was like, hey, you want to hear it? You want to hear it? I got a story to tell you. And here it is. The good, the bad, and the ugly and the ugliest. Down to the worst, right? Now, why I say that is again, like I said, I can fall in love with the Word of God and like stories like that, and you guys can do that as well, and we can know it backwards and forwards and go, man, look at Legion go. But the interesting thing is Jesus wants us to do the same thing, right? So often we want to sit and we want to go, it is good to be with Jesus, right? But Jesus doesn't want that to become to a point where we go selfishly, I'm just going to keep Jesus to myself. I'm going to keep this incredible gift that he's given to transform and to change me in such a beautiful way. I'm going to hoard that. And I'm going to hide it off from the world and from others that he wants to send me to help them experience that same glorious gift and blessing. And like I've been saying already, guys, I know if you see it, but it's selfish. It's selfish. And I've been guilty of it, and maybe some of you as well. But like Nate already kind of alluded to, all of us, like Legion, have opportunities to share the gospel. But I think so often we want to try to attempt to share it without sharing our scars, our wounds, our messiness. We want to be able to share our resume that makes us, again, look good. Again, instead of pointing to how good God is, so that people can find hope in him and not in themselves or in us. You guys have, like, if you're part of plants here, or even in some of the other places, hopefully, if you're evangelizing, you have maybe some form of, like, cross chat or Bible talks or things like that you can invite your friends to. So often, though, what I see happen, and guys, it's a shame for us a lot of times when we do this, but people come in, and I often ask myself, God, when friends or guests are coming in that don't know you, and they come into our church building, or they come into our cross chats, they come into these things, what will they leave having seen and experienced? will they leave having seen you and finding the hope that they've been so desperately looking for out there in their workplaces and in their schools and wherever they're at? And hopefully we're all asking that question, and it'll motivate us like Legion to go, this is going to be scary, it's going to be uncomfortable, but again, let me initiate and lead the way and let these people know that there is hope out there. And let me tell you why. Look at my wounds, look at my ugliness, look at what I've been through. And in many ways, it's going to be similar to a lot of the people and the things that they're going through. One instance I'll share with you all specifically, where that's happened recently with me. I've had some people that I've been reaching out to. One of them, maybe seems kind of really small, but I think Nate was talking about like TC and others like letting people borrow their cars to drive and stuff. And I have one friend that I've been trying to reach out to, and he messaged me finally out of the blue after just kind of not answering for a while. And I go, hey, how's it going? He goes, I'm struggling, to be honest. And part of it is he doesn't have a job, he doesn't have a car, he has a family, a baby, stuff like that with his girlfriend and stuff. And being able to share with him, I could hold it back, but being able to share with him, hey, like, I get it, but not just, hey, I relate, I'm sorry what you're going through. But I know what that's like, for the first, 8 to 10 months of our first year out there in the church plant, I moved out there, guys, without a job, without a place to stay. And fortunately, the Sheds let me stay with them and some others. I didn't have a car to drive because my hoopty that I had before that I tried to bring up from Huntsville, it gave out on me finally, right? And so now, but I've been fortunate. There's hope in that even my car that I do have out there now, it's out of commission right now, sitting in my driveway at home. And I'm trying to save up to get it. But in the meantime, in order to serve God and to serve others, God has provided through his people. And so there have been people like Danielle, there's been people like Brett and Ashlyn, and many others that have been willing to help me to be able to have a vehicle to be able to do what God wants me to do. But also in the meantime, I get to drive around our church van a lot of times, which we still need to paint. But, even with people a lot of times and the kids mocking, going, man, you going to pick us up in the kidnapper van today? Sort of thing. And so it's kind of awkward, but guys, I'm thankful that God has done that and being able to share that hope with that other person. But one other one that's a little heavier I'll share with y'all. As many of you know, Mackie and Danielle's mom, Mammy, passed a couple months ago, around the beginning of November, heading into last holiday season. Nate and Kayla's grandma. And in many ways, again, because I've known their family for so long, pretty much literally from the time before I was before I was a disciple and being reached out to, it was through their family. And so there's not many memories I can think of that they haven't been a part of, that Mammy wasn't there and wasn't a part of. And so very much has been like a grandma or a mom to me. And so it's been very, 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 hard. Just recently, us going through that and coming through that, guys. But the reason I share that with you is that there's another family that I'm currently trying to reach out to, and some of their teens are like coming in to church and involved in our cross chats and stuff. And I wanted them to come this weekend. Part of why they couldn't is because they're experiencing a loved one that's on their deathbed in their dying days now. And one of the family members, one of the older adults, reached out to me. And part of what they shared was how hard of a time they were having with that. And, even saying things, vocalizing emotions that they're feeling like, I'm so hurt and I want to be angry and hate God for this. I want to hate him for this right now because it's so painful. And why would he put my family through so much grief and take away someone that he knows we've loved so much and that we've been able to experience so many beautiful moments with? And just in short, guys, I hope you know that part of where I'm going with that is that as uncomfortable as that can be at times in many ways, and as much as it's hurt and as much as we all miss Mammy, one of the things that God has given me through that to be able to share comfort and hope with those other people is because the Shed family and myself and really our Crossway Church family out there in the church plant, many of us have already experienced that comfort and that hope from God through that moment, right? We have hope beyond the grave. We know that we'll get to see Mammy. We'll get to see many of those people that are in Christ again. And being able to share that with the world around us, that it doesn't have to just be all pain and hurt, right? But there can be glorious things that comes out of that if we allow God to lead us through that. We get to be a part of that, but you have to share those stories. You have to share those hurts and those hard times. Just go ahead.
And number 4, I need to walk in the light before God. I'll try to fly through this. John chapter 3, verse 20 through 21, it says, "Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." So we've walked through, different types of relationships we have, relationships with our leaders, relationships with other disciples, and relationships with the lost. And all of those have different nuances and they look a little different. But the most important one is this one that we're ending on, is our relationship with God. And the fact is that all 3 of those relationships, all the relationships that we have, they start, they end, and they are all centered around our individual relationship with God. And so when it comes to that relationship, we have to walk in the light before God. It says that those who do evil hate the light. And so the Nate Shedd version is that they hate vulnerability and openness. You see, when all your crap, when all the things that you got going on is out for the world to see, out for your other guys or girls or the people that you trust, if they can see all that, then you're putting yourself in a position to get dragged through the mud. That's just the fact of the matter. Same thing with the lost. There are people that you're going to pour your heart out to that are not going to receive it well. They're going to actually take your heart and punt it across the room. And the fact is that I don't know why we're shocked, because they did the same thing to Jesus. And actually, they did it even worse things to Jesus. And so, but we like to convince ourselves that, man, and the thing is, we can walk around, we can put on a face. Like I was saying, if Dimitri can fool me into thinking he's got it all figured out. And a lot of the time, when it comes to the lost, when it comes to our discipleship, like our other friends that are disciples, we like to put on this face of, man, I got it all together. Meanwhile, I've been in the room looking at stuff I ain't supposed to. Meanwhile, I've been treating my wife bad. Meanwhile, I've been living a life that would not exemplify what the scriptures say. And yet I can present myself to those people and make them think I got it all together. And that's the truth of the matter. But the real truth that we all need to understand is that there's one person that you're not fooling, and that is God. You can fool your friends that you invite to cross chat. You can fool your friends that are sitting in your guy time or your girl time, but you're not fooling God. But we like to think that we are. And when we do that, it affects the relationships that we have with all those people. We turn into bad friends. We run away from our leaders, and we're fake to the people that we're trying to reach out to, and then we wonder why nothing's going our way. We wonder, and we treat God the same way. And like I said, it starts, it ends, and it's centered around our individual relationship with God. And if that is not right, if you're not able to look and have a relationship with God that is able to look to Him and turn to Him in your time of need, then you are absolutely going to fall short in every single one of the relationships that we talked about. And every single one of the relationships that we talked about are key ones that is going to skyrocket your growth spiritually, i.e., if you lean on your leaders, they're going to, your spiritual walk is going to go like this. If you have good godly friendships, then you're going to be able to get picked up when you fall. And if you're opening your heart to the lost, you're going to have a kingdom impact that God is going to be able to work through. But at the end of the day, if you're lying to all those people, you've convinced yourself that you can lie to God, and that's just not true. It says, and one of my favorite verses, and we'll end on this, is 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10. It's my favorite verse because it's probably the hardest one for me to follow. And it said, and Paul is talking, he says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. In weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I'm strong." So Paul understands something that I often have a hard time understanding. And I think y'all would relate to me in this way of, man, I don't think I've ever in my life said I delight in weakness, insults, hardships, persecution, and difficulties, and I've never heard anyone say that to me either. But yet, this is the attitude that the greatest evangelist of all time outside of Jesus has, and we see the impact that Paul is able to have. And what this is all saying is, Paul is saying, I'm down to let you know that I'm the worst of them all. And in fact, he says that. I'm down for you to see the real me, and if it comes down to you not liking me, that's fine, but I'm still going to love you in spite of that, because that's what Jesus did for me. I was someone that didn't deserve loving. I was someone that persecuted God, and yet God was able to work through me because I trusted him and I obeyed him. And then Paul goes on to show that to other people, and that goes into what I was saying earlier, is as we are having relationships with each other, if we're not able to admit when we're weak, your impact is going to go down. If you're not able to admit to the lost that are seeing you in CrossChat to be like, man, I got my things and I'm figuring them out, they're never going to relate to you on a deep level to where, man, that person went through that thing, I can get through it too, sweet, I'm on board. If you got it all figured out, they're sitting there thinking, man, I don't have it all figured out. What am I supposed to do? And yet we so often put on this facade to all these people that, man, we got it all together, and then in the background, God's like, I know the real you, and I love you in spite of that, but you don't believe me. And so vulnerability is crucial in every single one of our relationships, our leaders, our disciples, the lost, and ultimately with God. So let's not love with words or speech, but let's move in action and show those people, show God that we love him by acting it out and loving sacrificially like we're called to. So I'm going to pray, and then we can be done. Dear God, thank you for today. Thank you for Dimitri. Thank you for this opportunity to give this lesson. I know it's a big challenge for me. I have a hard time admitting weaknesses. I have a hard time putting my heart out there because I know that, it can be hard sometimes, but I also know the impact that it can have on the lost and on the people around me. And I trust your word when you say that you give us a way out, that you will, if we trust in you. So I thank you for all these relationships. I pray for this weekend that we can take everything out of it and let your spirit move. I pray for this semester and that we just continue to grow your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.